Good evening, fellow Rotarians. Good evening, RI Director Valerie Wafer, District Governor Lyle, fellow governors, past district governors, Rotarians, all welcome to a session that I'm hoping that will open your eyes a little bit and cause us to pause and think about this new topic. It's new to us in Rotary, but generally not new. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had the honor a few weeks ago of being a part of being a participant, an attendee of a webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this lady totally knocked my socks off, and I wanted her to be a part of our pets because I thought she best described this new area in the best way. So it was my intention to see how I could get her to visit us for our pre-pets. And here she is today, thanks to PDG David and, as usual, his resourceful self. So I just want you to listen to this presentation, take it all in, think about how we can do this in our clubs, and let's have some enlightened questions at the end because we will have time for a Q&A. So without further ado, I'm just going to read the bio before we start the video because you're going to see a different face that is going to introduce Director Valerie, but then you'll get to the meat of the matter. So Valerie Wafer joined Rotary in 2005 in order to fuel her passion for making an impact that matters. Valerie was District Governor of RI District 7070, covering the Greater Toronto Area in 2013-14. Now residing in Collingwood, her home club is the Rotary Club of Collingwood, South Georgian Bay, Rotary International District 7010. Valerie has continued to serve Rotary in a number of international roles. She is an international trainer, a member of the host organizing Convention Committee, Toronto 2018, representative of the RI President, and is an elected member of the Rotary International Board for 2020 to 2022. During Valerie's tenure as a Rotarian, she has participated and led many initiatives, including a recent mission to Kosovo with the Gift of Life International. She's also served as the vocational training team leader to Australia in 2010, focusing on youth mental health, in National Immunization Day in India in 2012, and has traveled to Kenya and Tanzania to audit long-term Rotary Foundation grant activity. In her non-Rotary life, Valerie had a 27-year career as a restaurant owner in Toronto. The brand Tim Hortons is the most recognized and iconic franchise in Canada. The Wafer's operation was best known for its inclusive hiring practices and accessibility, especially in the area of employment. Valerie and her husband of 33 years, Mark, are Paul Harris Fellows, Bequest Society members, and major donors to the Rotary Foundation. Fellow Rotarians, I now present the video with Director Valerie and the panel. Thanks very much. Enjoy.
Hello, family of Rotary and guests, and welcome to Infinite Possibilities, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, presented by District 6960 and co-sponsored by Rotary Zones 33 and 34. I am Stephanie Yurchik, Rotary International Director for Zones 3334, and I am very proud of this initiative and of the team that produced 4 seminars last fall, highlighting some phenomenal women in our organization and focusing on women in Rotary. Those sessions were all about women in Rotary and not just for women in Rotary. It was hugely successful and opened the door for our newest membership initiative, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which begins today and will run through April 30th, 2021. Hopefully, you've been with us for prior seminars. In July, we hosted Dr. Sylvia Whitlock, the first female Rotary Club president who caused a sensation in both the California and U.S. Supreme Courts, resulting in Rotary International allowing women to come into membership. In August, we hosted Jenny Stotts, a troublemaking, but in a good way, millennial who encouraged us all to find our Rotary happy and advocated for our Rotary clubs to mirror our communities, an important point in today's conversation. In September, past Rotary International Vice President Dean Roars gave a powerful presentation as she shared her personal journey and how it set the stage for future involvement and leadership at the highest levels of Rotary. We rounded our series in October with the incomparable Rotary International President nominee, Jennifer Jones, our first female president of Rotary International, who led a discussion filled with vision and inspiration. To all 4 of these women, we are grateful for their participation in Infinite Possibilities and for highlighting what we all can do to make the world a better place. Our Rotary International theme for this year is Rotary Opens Opportunities. All you need to do is walk through that door to find like-minded people who want to make the world better, just like you do. Rotary is a platform. You are the difference, and we invite you to join us. Before I introduce our host for today, just let me say thank you once again to District 6960 Governor Darrell Keys and past District Governor Cindy Dora for their leadership in putting these series together and for keeping membership in our organization on the front burner for us all. And now it's my honor and privilege to introduce today's moderator, Rotary International Director Valerie Wafer, who also serves as the chair for Rotary International's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, Director Stephanie, and welcome to the over 1,000 participants who have registered and joined us today for another outstanding presentation on membership growth and retention. Rotary International at its very inception was built on the concept of diverse membership represented by our vocations. But today, the conversation of diversity means something quite different and is reflective of our understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing that our differences are our strengths. I'm excited to be with you today. We're going to have a wonderful conversation with our panelists that I'll introduce in a moment. Please remember to use the Q&A button on your screen to ask questions, and we hope to get to many of them following our panel discussion. And also remember this session is being recorded because it's going to be a great and useful resource to continue this conversation. So it is my pleasure now to introduce our 3 panelists. Joshua Innes is currently a mechanical engineer in training and a dual member of the University Rotaract Club in Alberta, Canada, and the Rotary Club for Global Action. Rhea Vandisic is from Croatia, and she's a past Rotary Youth Exchange student, leader in Interact, and actively involved in Rotaract through Eastern Europe. Paula Moray started his Rotary career in the Bahamas, but currently resides in the state of Virginia, USA. Paul was paralyzed as a teenager, and throughout his life, he has been physically challenged. Through his experience, he recognizes each day as a gift, and his positive attitude changes the lives of everyone he encounters. We appreciate each of you joining us today, and so let's get started. When someone says strength lies in our differences, they're referencing the power of diversity. If one were to belong to a group of people, all from the same age group, similar income levels, same ethnic background, and all living in the same community, you would notice that their views and ideas are very similar. The advantage of a more diverse group is that each individual can contribute from lived experience that is obvious to them, but completely new and surprising to others. It's amazing to think what solutions we can learn from that. Therefore, my first question is based on that very statement, that strength lies in differences and not similarities. What is your opinion of that statement? And can you provide an example that supports your thinking? Josh, let's start with you.
Sure. So first things first, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. To kind of answer the question, I think that when you have a homogenous looking society, you present opportunities for blind spots. Whereas, when you have the opposite, you really do have somebody looking from all angles, from all perspectives, and you're able to kind of withstand challenges and come up with solutions that you may not have had otherwise. I use like some kind of like cute examples when you look at every metaphor in every Disney movie where the person with the unique quality is the one that solves whatever problem is facing the society. So it may not be as distinct as Nemo fitting through the water filter, or as like in contrast as Batman and Superman, but those teams are that much stronger because they have uniqueness in their diversity.
That's great. We each do have our own identity or our own superpower. So I love your analogy, Josh. Rhea, how about you? How do you feel our strength lies in our differences?
Well, I would like to say thank you for having me first, as well as Josh. I would absolutely agree with Josh. I think it is the beauty of different approaches, ideas, and backgrounds that ultimately produces the most valuable results, So I can understand that people feel very comfortable when they're surrounded by those who are similar to themselves. And we all have that tendency to do that every day, whether it's our friends or, whoever we affiliate with. But I think it's that sense of security that often prevents us to push ourselves and our ideas and our actions beyond our comfort zone, which is where the biggest success, I think, comes from. Maybe just from like my personal experience as a Rotary Youth Exchange student way back in 2009, there was a great event in my high school in Venice, Florida, that was called Unity Day, that included students from various backgrounds who were nominated by their teachers and who came together one day and participated in a series of workshops that were aimed, at promoting unity. So I had a chance to participate being the foreign exchange student in the school, and it was just an amazing thing to see because there were kids, from various backgrounds, whether it was ethnic backgrounds or, different cultural aspects, or even financial aspects that came together as complete strangers. And just through one day of open conversations and giving each other a chance to present themselves, we literally came out as friends. Some of my best friends from Florida, where I met them on that day. So it was just a great thing where we embraced our differences, but built on them. And it really produced, valuable and long-term results in my life.
That's a great example, Rhea. Sometimes we need to be intentional to create those safe environments where we can have that conversation. And I think that's something that we can really do in our Rotary clubs and in our districts. I think that's a great example of how we can be comfortable with our sameness. Paul, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Rotary does things as long as I've been a Rotarian, which was most of my life, we always do something. We always build something or fix something or help somebody with something. Well, if you're building a house, you don't have one person building the house. You have a carpenter, you know, the plumber, the electrician. There are 100 different people who have to go to build this house. Well, that's how it works with Rotary. Not one Rotarian can do anything, but 10 Rotarians could do a multiple of things. So that's how we get things done, because there's not just one kind of Rotarian, there's 10 of us. And each one does something for the whole pie to get together and make it happen.
No, I completely agree with you, Paul. I think our diversity brings that creativity and it leverages everyone's talents. You know, as you described in building a house, it really needs our collective talents to move us forward. Any other comments before we move on to the next question? No? Okay, great. Off to a great start. I feel like we're in a room just having a conversation, which is exactly the way this should be evolving. So thank you for that. Martin Luther King once said, "Life at its best is a creative synthesis of opposites in fruitful harmony." So my understanding and perspective of this is directly related to innovation. A diversity of thought leads to a different level of problem solving, exactly the way innovation actually flourishes. So what are your thoughts on this, how innovation flourishes when we are diverse? Rhea, let's start with you. What are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree that diversity of thought can positively influence innovation, and it definitely does, you know, in every single aspect. But I would personally look at that concept from a much broader perspective as well. I think that diversity of thought, if encouraged and expressed, you know, politely, and as people in Rotary like to say, in goodwill, it helps humanity grow in every possible way. So it's not just ideas necessarily that flourish, but it's human relationships as well. You know, so if we can all express our ideas as equals and discuss them openly, I think everyone wins. Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to agree with each other completely or even reach a consensus, because that's not always possible. But I think what matters is only that we listen to each other openly and, you know, try to understand the background, like those basic principles the other person bases their opinions on. And I think that produces amazing results, not necessarily just in innovation, but absolutely including innovation. I think it just makes everything flourish in general. So I would definitely agree with that statement.
Great. Paul, how about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, it's a matter of perspective. If I'm looking at a focal point, I see it from one view. But if 10 of us are looking at it from a different side of the box, we're actually not looking at the focal point. We're looking outside the box. And that makes innovation exponential. You can't even imagine how wide the view is now, because now there's 10 of us looking at it from so many angles. You just can't lose.
All right, completely agree. Couldn't agree more. Josh, how about you? Round out this question.
Yeah, I really like what the others have said as well. But when I first heard this, I kind of wanted to take it a different direction, especially because it's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. So he was talking about opposites working in fruitful harmony. I think a lot of what he inspired people to do in the face of such violence and such brutality kind of would go against your human nature. He's inspiring people to be peaceful at a time where you're not being shown any peace. And when I think about that in relation to Rotary and trying to think outside of the box, there's going to have to be a certain amount of work that goes into building bridges with people in different communities that maybe you've never understood before, or you haven't worked with before. And at first it may seem like going against what's natural for you. It may feel a little bit opposite to what you're used to, but I think that's one of the ways that we grow, and that's one of the ways that that we can continue like to learn and understand and work with each other. So.
Great insight from each of you. Let's move on to the next question. Inclusion is the tangible effort that leads to equity. Can you provide us with examples of how inclusion has shaped your world? Paul, let's start with you.
Well, to begin with, being paralyzed is a big thing. When I first became paralyzed, I had no idea what I was up against. And when I came back to the Bahamas from rehab, I realized how I was not included in almost anything, because people in the Bahamas at that time, that was 45 years ago, did not see anyone in a wheelchair as someone who was viable at all. So I had to fight for that. And by doing that, I found people want to include others. They just don't know what the possibilities are. And I think that every Rotarian and every human has to say to everyone, look, just try to see it on a different angle. Try to understand that we are different. We're all different because we're made differently. And it's not bad to be you, but it's good to see someone else for who they are and what they are, and open your mind to be able to believe that they can do more than you think they can do. And that inclusion makes a world of difference, because now not only you're included in something, but the other person now has a bigger view of life. They can actually say to themselves, wait a minute, my vision was so tunneled and now it's open. They themselves can find themselves vastly better than they were before. So I think it's up to us to open that vision to others.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. People don't want to exclude others. For the most part, our bias is learned behavior, and we can unlearn it. And it's through conversations and including those who we haven't seen in our Rotary clubs, it opens our eyes. And it takes constant effort, there's no doubt. So thank you for your comments. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I think, obviously inclusion is great. I think one way that we can think about that and work towards that is shifting the idea from I to we. I think that when we start to see things as this is for our common benefit, we're all working towards something great here, and how much greater would we be if we included more people, we included more perspectives, like what could we accomplish? And I just think that it's kind of a powerful tool that will just really help you gain perspective.
Now, Josh, you and I have served on a panel before, so we've been introduced in the fall, and we had a lot of fun with that. And you told a very compelling story and a very great example of how inclusion and equity need to be looked through sometimes through different lenses other than our own. Would you share that story with us?
Definitely. So we had talked, we were talking about basically the different struggles and the different perspectives that different groups may have. So I myself, as a Black male, would have a different perspective and have gone through different experiences than, let's say, a white woman. And, going through the Me Too movement a couple of years ago really gave me some perspective that there would have been no other way for me to have learned otherwise. I could have asked friends and whatnot, but seeing the scale of that really opened my eyes and gave me the opportunity to kind of step back, look and listen and learn. And I really appreciated that. Sometimes it's really easy to be siloed, to be thinking of just I as just like, the world is just against me. But everybody is going through different things. And it's really, really powerful to be able to humble yourself, take a step back and say, no, this is my time to listen, right?
Thank you so much for sharing. So powerful. Rhea, let's hear your perspective on how inclusion has shaped your world.
Absolutely. I just want to say that what Josh and Paul have said has truly been like profound. And I think my perspective might be different in a way. I think I'm very privileged, not just, being a white, like middle class woman living in Europe, which is, not a very discriminated against group. Maybe the women part in some aspects, but in general, I think I'm very, very privileged. And just being able to recognize that I am privileged, I think is the first step towards including others. Because until we realize that we're not necessarily, standing on the same like steps, let's put it that way, that some people are by default put in lower positions just because of, what they look like or what they believe in. I think when you recognize where you kind of stand, you can kind of help change that and equalize all that. And so I think from my perspective, that's the first thing, to recognize that I am privileged in so many ways. But as the guy said, I think the first big step towards inclusion would be openness to different people, to other people, and just not thinking that we know what it's like, because I think we all kind of do it in a way. I can say, oh yeah, I know, African American people are in a bad position in this and that way, but I really can't know that. Like I have, friends who are African American and they can tell me, but still that would not, it doesn't put me in their shoes. And just working on that, trying to gain their perspective, trying to listen to what they have to say, whether it's, I just gave an example of African Americans, but it can be any group that's discriminated against. Just listening to their perspective and not presuming that we know what it's like. I think that is a great step towards equity and towards inclusion.
And I think you've just really highlighted the importance of these conversations. I mean, even amongst us, we're learning from each other. We met last week very briefly, and every time we have a conversation, it's like we just have that little extra takeaway and learning from each other. So that's why these panel discussions are so important, and the discussions that we have day to day. Anyone else have any input to that question before we move on?
Nothing really, other than great responses from everyone.
Great responses. I think this is a great conversation. Okay, let's go on to the next question. The journey to equity is a never-ending struggle. This means at some point in the not too distant past, you face barriers to inclusion and indeed may still face barriers. Can you comment on that and perhaps give us some of the strategies that you use to fight bias? Josh, we're going to start with you.
Sure. So questions like these are really tough because, in a certain essence, you're asking somebody to kind of recount traumatic experiences or experiences where they felt really uncomfortable to be themselves. So I won't necessarily answer like my own personal experience when it comes to that, but I will share the strategies that I share to kind of overcome biases. The first thing that I try to do is relate with whichever person. Well, even if they're showing you the least bit of respect or the utmost disrespect, you need to show them just how human you are and how similar you are to them. And it makes them uncomfortable because they realize, wait a second, if I'm doing this to this person who's really not that different from me, would I do the same thing to my friend, to my partner, to my parents, to myself? We're all connected. So, what you do to me is really a reflection of the behavior that you would do to yourself. So yeah, that's my strategy.
Great. Paul, let's move to you on that question.
Well, again, I'm going to use my disability. Being in a wheelchair, people can see that I'm disabled. But there are so many people in the world who have something that they can't do. And that being their disability, you may not know that. So you have to think to yourself about each person that you, again, we're going back to the open-mindedness. Each person in the world that you ever meet, before you even think about anything, you have to not have prejudgments of them. You have to say to yourself, like when I meet Josh, I don't think anything about him. I just listen to who he is. And then when you see each person for what they are, it changes everything. The way your own perspective is just so different. And it means that now they can be your friend. If you meet your enemy, you have to say to yourself, who is this person? Not that they're my enemy. Because someone becomes your enemy because of something they do or say, not because of who they are. So you know that if they haven't done or said anything that makes them your enemy, they must be your friend.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, studies have shown that our brain can only comprehend so many different stimuli that comes at us every day, and that's where really our bias falls into. And so you're absolutely right, Paul. When somebody sees you, they can see that you're in a wheelchair, but that's where it should end. That's not the judgment of Paul. That is the observation. And so having that open mind as to not set those preconceived notions or bias and let them influence us is so important. Rhea, let's go to you.
Absolutely. You know what, you saying that the journey to equity is a never-ending struggle actually right now reminded me of a quote from Harry Potter that says that sometimes we must choose between what is right and what is easy. And I think those are the choices that we have to make, you know, on a daily basis, basically. There sure are many, many obstacles in the way of achieving equity, but that doesn't mean that equity is not the goal that we all must strive to achieve. So in my opinion, going back to the strategies, I think the best way to fight prejudice and stereotypes is through hands-on experience. Because I think it's very hard to insist on our wrongly founded beliefs when we get the chance to meet someone who belongs to our stereotypical group and yet is nothing like what we imagined. You know, I think nothing breaks down our barriers more than actually meeting a person that's very different from the stereotype we have of them. So our education and exposure to those who are different to us and emphasizing our similarities while still showcasing our differences. As you all said, you know, noticing someone's skin color or, you know, someone's physical disability. Okay, we need to acknowledge that that exists, absolutely, because that in a way also is part of who we are, but it's not all what we are, you know, it doesn't determine who we are. It doesn't say anything about the person itself. So I think definitely showcase our differences, but emphasize our similarities. And I think that's the best way to break down barriers, you know, see people behind the false labels that we so often attribute them. And also, I think, I honestly don't think that the journey to equity and inclusion is as difficult as commonly thought. I just think people sometimes like to exaggerate in saying how difficult it is, because when we say it's, oh, that's so difficult, well, it kind of gives us an excuse to not even try. So I think we all have, you know, that inside of us instilled, me absolutely as well. When we say something's too difficult, well, that gives us a way out, you know, like a joker, that we don't have to necessarily deal with that. And I think that's, you know, a big thing to kind of realize and maybe try to stop doing. So that would be kind of my personal experience and strategy in that.
Oh, that's excellent. Any other comments before we move on to the next question? Great answers.
Be brave.
Honest. Go ahead, Paul.
Just have to be brave.
Absolutely. All right. So next question. Since so much of what we see as racism, intolerance, or discrimination is based on unconscious bias, what strategies do you use to help shift those stereotypes into a force of good? Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, unconscious bias works both ways. So representation is incredibly important. Just kind of going off on a side, in 2018, when the Black Panther movie came out, like, I was full Lord. Like, for me, like, it was just like, you know, finally, can we see ourselves represented honestly, like in a cool way, that people could look up to, and it was like the top grossing movie at the time. I was like, you know, this was made like not only for me, but for other people to truly see me and to see like who we are for who we are. And yeah, you'll notice the poster, whatever. But yeah, I think that the more opportunities that we get to see other people represented for who they really are, and other people telling their own stories, I think the better. I think, you know, we're just training our brains to truly understand people. So.
Great, excellent. Rhea, how about you?
Absolutely agree with Josh. As I mentioned earlier, I would always start with education and hands-on exposure, which is similar to some of what Josh was saying. But I think that it really is the basis of everything, because most of the bad things in this world come from fear and lack of knowledge, primarily, I think. So once that gap is surpassed, those negative traits we often attach to people suddenly tend to lose a big part of their negativity. You know, once you actually learn more and give people a chance to present themselves, you'll see that a lot of the things that you had preconceived about them might not, you know, stand anymore. I also think another huge thing is using facts and kindness as tools for disarming hateful people. Just, you know, never go on their level, just because bullies usually know how to deal with other bullies, but tend to find their strategy lagging when faced with a kind approach. So I would personally just go from there. Education, hands-on exposure, and kindness primarily, because I think we really need that in the world right now.
Great strategies. Paul, let's hear from you.
That's absolutely true. In all of my years of advocacy, 99% of it is education. Just telling people what it really is, because misconceptions are, you know, this is what we have. We have people that have been taught misconceptions. And once they know the truth, they just change their mind. I don't think people in general are mean. I think they learn to be mean. And I think they don't want to be mean. They want to be kind. They want to be helpful. And so if they learn something better, they're willing to go with it.
Great, thanks. We're going to move on to our last question before the Q&A. So how do you respond to those who believe they've solved the problems of intolerance? I can't help but giggle, sorry. Who believe their institutions or workplaces don't have systematic racism or systematic intolerance? Rhea, let's hear your thoughts.
Well, primarily, I think it's great to acknowledge the progress the institutions or workplaces have made when it comes to, you know, eradicating intolerance or inequity and all those things. I think that's great, and we should all be proud, you know, about the progress we are making. However, I think that the work in that field is never truly done, and thinking anyone has achieved it is like standing on a trapdoor and, you know, waiting to pull the lever yourself. So I think there are always more things to learn, more areas to improve, and more biases to become aware of. So I would definitely, you know, try to kind of emphasize that to people. But I think that the only time that we will ever be successful in solving the problems of intolerance will be when we recognize that we still have a long way to go. So I think that the strive for equity is an ideal, and that is unfortunately hardly ever completely fulfilled, but it is an ideal that we're striving towards. And, you know, progress should be emphasized, and we should be proud of it. However, while realizing that we still have a lot of work to do.
Paul, how would you weigh into this?
That's absolutely true, Rhea. I totally agree with her. She's right on with it. This is a battle that's never going to be over, and we can only keep fighting the battle and keep teaching and keep being a good person and showing people that goodness can come from goodness, and that we just have to expand that goodness.
Josh, final words to you on this question.
Yeah, it's tough. I won't lie to you. But I think I would ask the question, you know, like, you know, who do you think the most dangerous type of person is out there? It's not the person who shows up in your face. It's not the person who tells you they don't like you outright. It's the person who looks like your friend. right? And that's what makes it harder. And you don't have to be that person. You don't have to be the one who is, I guess, not supportive in the times that they need to be, because they haven't taken the time to understand. Yeah, I think it's tough. But I think also it's good to find your allies, find the people that truly are kind of behind the idea, and work as a group. Like, you don't have to change the world by yourself. And also, your allies may not look like you once expect them to. Like, one example I love is like the K-pop band that is like super involved in all of this. Maybe your stereotypical conservative looking person is having changes of heart. And it's really important to be able to recognize the goodness so that you can take on more challenges, like people who say there's no problem, right? And you do that much better with the team. So
yeah, this was such an excellent conversation. I think that all the people on the line today can see that this panel was very intentionally put together for their different perspectives, but they've just really added to the conversation today. So that concludes our formal conversation with our three panelists. I now would like to introduce
Thank you, District Governor-elect Sonia and PDG David, for inviting me to be with you today. And in fact, I know you're not going to be surprised. I really do wish I was with you today, because we have 2 feet of snow on the ground, but the sun is shining. So it was possible. The sun's kind of going down now here. But anyways, thank you so much for inviting me. And all I can say about that panel was, wow, those panelists were so articulate, honest, and open to the discussion that we had. And as I mentioned in my comments, we were intentional to bring diversity of thought and lived experience to that panel discussion. And, a few quotes that really stand out to me from that discussion, Josh saying that a homogeneous community brings blind spots, and how hard it is to show peace when you're not being shown peace yourself. And to work with people, to build bridges with people you've never worked with before. Really, really insightful. And Ria, oh my goodness, what an articulate young lady. Incredible insight on creating that psychological safe space to have those conversations, and that diversity of thought and listening positively. I mean, how that raises human relations. And I love the way Paul, used his example of building a house. We all bring our special skills and talents, and his genuine personal sharing that people want to include others and don't intend to be mean. So I really, I think they each brought a very different perspective. But here's the key takeaway every time I watch this, here's my key takeaway, is that panel discussion is none of us are or were diversity experts. It doesn't have to be complicated, right? We won't always get it right, and we're going to make mistakes. But if we're intentionally committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, we will move Rotary forward. So what I like to say is that diversity simply is, but inclusion is the action. Or another way of saying it is, diversity is the noun and inclusion is the verb. As we know, a top priority for Rotary is growing and diversifying our membership to make sure that we reflect the communities we serve and we're inclusive of all cultures, experiences, and identities. It's exciting because we're building an organization that is more open and inclusive, fair to all, building goodwill and benefiting our communities. And as you probably know, in January 2019, the Rotary International Board of Directors passed a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure it's part of your conversation, but it really talks about our values and how our values really direct our behaviors and our thought of inclusion. So let's look at one aspect of diversity in Rotary that we can make immediate advances in: women in Rotary and women in leadership positions. So as of July 1 this year, there are 6 women on the board. And July 1st of this year, 2021, this year, Rotary year, there'll be 8 women on the board. And if you include our president nominee, Jennifer, there'll be 9. And so that actually brings our board to gender parity for the first time in the history of our organization. Clap out loud for that one, Sonia. I agree. This is healthy and this is necessary because a diverse board brings innovation, alternate opinions and thought, and most of all, a diverse board brings fairness of opportunity and leadership. You may know that Rotary International has set a strategic goal to have membership of women in Rotary at 30% by 2023. And some may argue that we shouldn't put a number on such an obvious demographic and that it should be 50%. But without goals and measurable outcomes, we might be having this conversation again in 2030. So let's break that down just a little farther. Currently, membership of women on a global basis sits at 24%. I'm pleased that North America and the Caribbean is currently at 33%. So that shows us that parts of our global organization are doing well, where others are sitting at around 20%. But here's the encouraging thing about DEI and demographics and the future leaders of our organizations. Rotaract, our future members and leaders, not an issue. Women in Rotaract globally sit at 45%. And in North America, it's 54%. So the Rotaractors already have gender parity. They already get it. What is certain is that we must remain relevant and attractive to new and diverse members, and we must be inclusive to potential new members. By 2025, millennials will dominate the global workforce by an estimate of 75%. And this is a generation that demands a diverse workplace and base their job offers and acceptances against a company's diversity. This is a generation that has raised their voices and allowed our generation and those before us to finally feel comfortable having those conversations. I was speaking to a large Rotary club in Michigan recently, and we touched on DEI, and I was asked to stick around after the meeting and continue the conversation. And after a few minutes, a Rotarian who self-identified as an African-American spoke up, and he shared with us a really personal and impactful message. After 15 years of being a Rotarian in this club, with his fellow members, his Rotary family, he never felt 100% accepted. And he never felt that he could express his concerns or his feelings. He saw many other potential Black members join, only to leave in the first couple of years. And the conversation that we're having today in our clubs and in our districts gave him the courage to speak up. It was incredibly moving because a lot of his fellow club members had no idea. And he finally felt that he could voice how he felt all these years. We need to cultivate a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture from which people from all underrepresented groups have greater opportunities to participate as members and leaders and feel comfortable and feel heard. And what's important is that we live by our DEI statement and we celebrate the contribution of all people regardless, and that our clubs reflect the communities that we live and work in. So as you heard in my introduction, I was a Tim Horton franchisee for 24 years, in the system for 27 because I worked at our head office before that. And if you don't know, Tim Hortons is the #1 franchise quick service restaurant business in Canada. So during the time we were in business, we employed over 200 workers with disabilities of all types in all positions, including senior management. At any given time, our disabled employees made up 20% of our workforce. And the reason we did this wasn't simply because it was the right thing to do, considering 20% of the world's population is disabled, but because it was good for business. By employing people with vastly different problem-solving skills, we created a more innovative workplace with higher safety ratings, lower absenteeism, and lower turnover rates. Therefore, by being more inclusive, we're all business people, many of us, we were more profitable because those indicators are really some of the largest cost centers to our business. Our staff, however, for the first time, were living full lives and contributing to society. So let's picture our Rotary Club as a franchise. Your employees, your members, come from the community in which you operate. Their families become your customers, your supporters, and your volunteers. You build awareness and loyalty when you touch the diverse population of your town. When you build capacity in a diverse membership, more will apply. When you walk through the door and you identify with other people in the room, the members in the room, you have an instant connection, a feeling of belonging, of worth, and of contribution. And when we have fundraising or hands-on activities that touch our diverse community, we gain more traction and awareness for our brand. So getting back to my restaurant example for just a minute, I can tell you that customers who walked through the door told us we weren't the closest Tim Hortons to their home or their business. But they came to us, they went out of their way because we represented the community. They walked through the door and they identified and they felt comfortable. And this is what our clubs should look like. Diversity is a given, honestly. We're all diverse. In any virtual room that we find ourselves, we are all diverse. We're diverse by our cultures, our occupations, our hobbies, our religion, our political beliefs. But to be inclusive takes effort. Remember, I referred to inclusion as the verb. But it also takes tone and intent from leadership, tone from the top. I opened up with Rotary International's diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, but a statement isn't good enough. We have to put action behind our words. And in July, the board conducted a meeting with only DEI on the agenda. And a decision was made to form a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force to bring recommendations to the board by June 2021. And President Holger Knack asked me to chair this committee, and we're excited about the work ahead of us. We recognize it is a heavy lift, and we will never be able to check that box and congratulate ourselves on a job well done, because culture change takes many years. But we can start the conversation and we can be upstanders. And perhaps even more importantly, it's up to our members to work this down at the club level and be intentional. So how can we do this? I like to look at it kind of in different steps. And first of all, we have to look at our current meeting and format locations. Is it convenient and accessible to everyone? Is it a comfortable environment that has no religious or political ties? Are we perhaps seeing some benefit of virtual meetings to be inclusive? And maybe this is something we should continue once our lockdown situations are lifted. Also, look at some of our traditions. And I'm not suggesting they're bad, I'm just suggesting we look at them. Things like singing the anthem, fining members, or the cost of a meal, which may cause financial stress and exclude some from joining. What time of the day do we meet? Can a young professional make a lunch meeting, for example? So once we take a look at our club and our environment, then it comes to education. We need to be intentional. We need to put somebody in charge, intentionally in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only at the district level, but at the club level. And ideally, someone with lived experience. Education sessions need to happen on unconscious bias, microaggressive behavior, privilege. We heard Rhea really outline really well what privilege means to her. How to be an upstander. So in other words, how to stand up and support the person who is being discriminated. And the difference between diversity and inclusion. A lot of people say we are diverse, but we're not inclusive. So people don't feel like they really can contribute just because we have diversity in the room. And then we need to take a look at policy. And culture is driven by us, but policy helps to support when we step out of bounds or when members step out of bounds, or even how we choose our leaders. So we need to take a look at our bylaws. Are we using inclusive language? Are there barriers to leaders and membership? I've heard some examples of an interview panel that is not diverse. So we bring in diverse potential leaders to be interviewed, but our biases get in the way. And so we need to look at every aspect of how we are bringing in members, how we're promoting leaders, and how we're supporting leaders. And then reach out to the community. Work with your diverse organizations in your community on projects or participate in events such as Pride celebrations or International Women's Day, which is coming up early next month, Disability Day, invite a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert to speak at your club. You know, we have all, have we really taken the time to assume that we know, or are we assuming that we know a person's necessary accommodations or stereotype or culture? Have we had the conversation? It really starts with that honest conversation like we had in that panel discussion, and like Ria described in that high school experience where they had the Unity Day. That was brilliant of that teacher to bring together. And when she told me about that before we had the panel discussion, she said they were intentional in that as well. And in her words, she said, we took the jock, we took the football star, you know, who was too cool, and we took the computer science lab person and the scientists, and she represented the diversity from being an international student. So they were intentional on bringing those people together as well. And, you know, we need to really ask and have those honest conversations. So, you know, just really be intentional with everything that we do with diversity, equity, and inclusion going forward. And in speaking with District Governor-elect Sonia, I know that she is intentional. And I know that forming a DEI committee to be a resource and a support to our Rotary clubs and members is an important step. So just want to leave it there. And I'm, you know, as Sonia mentioned, we're going to have, I guess, some questions. It's an absolute honor for me to be with you here today. So thank you for including diversity, equity, and inclusion in your training and your conversation.
Thank you so much, Valerie. You know, I attended that session, and listening to it again, it just created a wow in me. I think that the panel you selected there was really good in terms of the perspectives, different perspectives that were shared there. But creating a club that is more open and inclusive and fair, and that will build goodwill and benefit our communities, really takes the responsibilities of everyone. It's not just the leader, it's everyone that has to take that on board and go. So we do have some questions. I know, I mean, quite a bit of information was shared, and I know that a lot of persons would have been listening keenly, and I'm sure making copious notes as well. But we do have two questions in the chat box, and they're coming from Virginia, and she's asking, well, she says that this subject was very powerful. The discussion is very interesting, and she's asking, how can we as Rotarians make a difference in the lives of people to ensure that in society no one is left behind in access to health care, education, job security, and basic needs in life?
You know, when we get more comfortable with this conversation and we become advocates in our own right, it becomes part of every facet of our daily life, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's in our Rotary clubs. And I think that that is our responsibility. The more we educate ourselves and the more we listen to those lived experience stories, which are so powerful, because as the panel said, none of us can understand what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. And so, you know, I thought Josh's example of the Me Too, you know, the story and sharing that, I really want you to include that in a panel discussion, because, you know, Josh may identify as a young Black man, but sometimes we need to take that step back, and we need to look through a different lens and understand what everyone else is going through and experiencing. And I think when we can do that, we really can become those advocates for healthcare and for equal opportunities in our daily lives. So I think it's about educating ourselves and really being those advocates.
Thank you. Definitely have to take it outside of Rotary as well. Mm-hmm. And the second question that Virginia has is, whereas diversity embraces differences, equity embraces similarities, inclusion is finding the right balance, how can Rotarians integrate these principles in their vocation?
Well, that's a great question. You know, as I said, we are diverse. We're diverse in our vocations, and we're diverse in any virtual room that we're in. Is our leadership and opportunities within our club inclusive enough that everybody feels that they are contributing? And, you know, equity really means, does everyone have the proper tools and support to be able to be their true authentic self and give their full leadership capability to our organization? So, you know, again, I think it does come down to the education of what the difference is between diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are very different.
Okay, thank you. George is asking a question. He said, speaking to inclusion, how do we differentiate between inclusion and assimilation, that is dealing with diversity of thought, while integrating those ideas into a common goal?
Thanks for that one.
Not to stump you, Valerie.
You know, I'm thinking of the word assimilation, and I think that's a very different word than inclusion. Yeah, I'd have to give some thought to that question. Sorry, yep, I'm a little stumped on that one.
Okay, that's okay. We'll put that according to PDG Larry into the parking lot, and you get back to us on that.
Okay.
We do. PDG David has a question he posted here. We did not discuss the impact of the media on diversity and inclusion. This is a powerful influence. I guess he's asking and seeking your opinion on that.
You know, David, you're absolutely right. We aren't born with bias. We learn bias, and we learn that through a number of different channels. And it's, you know, it can be influencers in our life, including our parents. The media plays a huge role in how our biases are shaped and how we are influenced by the language that is used. You know, it's really interesting too when we look at media as far as the visual aspects of media, and we look at that stereotypical news anchor and realize that we are not really encouraging everyone to show up as their true authentic self when we are putting them in front of a camera and they all look very, very similar. And I think that influences as well how I think even women feel they should look, or, you know, we all have our uniform, right? And I think that it's really accentuating that perceived showing up as how it should look. And so I think the media plays a huge role, not only in their language, but in their appearance. And then we could go into, you know, Hollywood stars and everything else, but it plays a huge role on shaping our opinions.
Thank you. That question actually came from Olivia.
Okay.
David was really just putting it in perspective. We do have a question from Marlon. If Rotary is adverse to political affiliation and association, aren't we not being as inclusive as we can be? Where do we draw the line between the fact that we're apolitical, meaning that we don't really get involved in politics in a direct sense, and we're talking about inclusion and fairness and equity? Where do we draw the line?
So this is not a political stance, and Rotary International just released a very strong statement last week, if you go onto Rotary International's Facebook page, to say that we will not tolerate racism or anything against our core values. This is a human rights issue. This is not a political issue. And I'm really proud that Rotary International is now using that language.
Oh, okay. Thank you. We do have a very interesting question from PhD Luana, and she said, do clubs have a responsibility to address any bias demonstrated by a member outside of Rotary environment, for example, their personal social media platform?
So that's a tough one. You know, I think we have a responsibility as leaders in Rotary, if you are a representative of Rotary, to realize that you are always speaking for Rotary. I'm not an expert on communications and media control, but I also realize that people should have a right to express their opinion on their social media channels. I really do hesitate to comment on if they are even criticizing our organization. I mean, it is part of you know, our right to be able to communicate and express our opinion. I don't know if that answers the question. I think that we've all seen some social media posts that we are not in agreement with, and they don't follow our values and our cultures. I think one of the things we need to do in our Rotary clubs is be upstanders and let people know that that is not behavior that follows our four-way test, follows our values. You know, we've all been in the room when an off-color joke is told or a sexist joke is told, and it's time for us to call it out. right? There's a respectful way to do it, but it's time for us in the moment to say this is not acceptable behavior, because everyone else in that room is waiting for your reaction. And if we brush it under the carpet and we don't answer it, or we answer it in the hallway, how many members now are very upset with the fact that we are condoning, really, because it seems like we're condoning if we don't call out the behavior in the moment.
Thank you so much. That's a question that's close to my heart as well. I wouldn't say why. There, Suzanne has, well, she's giving a little statement here. The simulation forced people to change themselves and take on someone else's culture to fit in. And she says she believes inclusion allows individuals to keep their culture beliefs and celebrate the diversity of others. Yet tempting to answer the question that George asked.
Yes. Yes.
Luana, any other questions or any other hands that are raised in the members, participants? No? Well, I guess I'll just hand over. Thank you so much, Valerie. A very interesting topic, and I think very, our district, as you know, is extremely diverse, 3 languages and several cultures. So I think this is a very important topic for us as well, but thank you so much. And I'll hand over to PAG Luana.
Thank you, Past President Liz, and thank you, Director Valerie, for a really insightful presentation. And the takeaways for me is that we must all be willing to listen and to demonstrate a willingness to take action against biases, whether conscious or unconscious. And I especially want to thank you for the data that you presented to us, particularly the comparison between our district and other districts. I find that very interesting, and I'm going to do some more research. So I'll now hand it over to Past Assistant Governor Balmati to do the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Are you hearing me? Good evening.
Yes, Val, we're hearing you.
All protocols observed. On behalf of our PPET training team, I consider it a great honor and privilege to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. What can I say? I now understand what our BGE said to Sonia, that she was so blown over when she took part in that talk by our presenter today. First of all, I would like to say that we have been truly blessed 4 times over. We have been truly blessed, first of all, to have an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She took valuable time from her very busy schedule to share with us her ideas and vast experience on this topic. Well, we had a panel discussion. What a big plus. I don't know how to really capture this, but the format of a panel discussion is always very, very good and effective strategy. We get so much more today than I think we bargained for. With respect to our director, Valerie, I just want to make reference to that example of the Tim Hortons company. That example really illustrates her advocacy. And she went on to explain in detail what we saw on the bio was that they were best known for inclusive hiring practices and accessibility. Little did we know the extent they went into to show that inclusiveness and equity. With respect to the panelists, oh my, really, we got a treat. Their contributions were really invaluable. I just want to make reference to some of the comments and ideas that were shared. For example, to saying that you look at everyone as a friend. Ria's contribution, their contributions were all very, very valuable, and some of the examples used we can very much relate to. very appropriate for us in the Caribbean. We can very much relate to some of the experiences that they shared. I want to probably capture a lot of what they shared as being a very positive approach. I was really blown over by the comments made and the ideas that they shared. And we have really a lot to take away from the experience this evening. So I'm sure you would all agree with me that the presentation by our distinguished RI Director Valerie and her team this evening was insightful, inspiring, as well as impactful. The information shared has certainly enlightened us and given us much food for thought. So a heartfelt thanks to you, Valerie, and to the panelists, Joshua, Rhea, and Paul. You really shared so much with us this evening. I want to take this opportunity at this time to congratulate Valerie on her appointment as Vice President for the 2021-22 Rotary year. At this time, I would extend gratitude to our hardworking team leader, Luana, to our district communications team, led by Sean, and to our translators. Finally, sincere appreciation to all our attendees for their support and participation. Your questions and comments have really cleared up some concepts and further enhanced our understanding of the topic. As was said during the discussion, you know, we have to keep working at this. We have to keep working at diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have to keep working. It's not going to really, we are not going to really achieve 100%, but we have to keep working at it. And to all others who contributed in any way to the resounding success of this evening's session. Pleasant good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, PAG Balmati. And just some quick housekeeping matters before we close. Please continue to register for the remaining sessions. The next session will be held on Thursday, March the 4th, and that will be on project design and implementation. It will be facilitated by Past President Katrina Sam, and this session will focus on how to conduct a needs assessment, how to conduct effective project monitoring, and how to implement legacy projects, among other interested areas that will be addressed. Participants are asked to also continue with completing the Learning Center courses, and don't forget to submit your certificates to us. Registration for PETS and district conference is also open. Please we encourage you rather to use the club registration so that as many members as possible can attend. We also are waiting on nominations from some of the countries to suggest names for the district training committee. We're looking to have one person from every country sit on the district training committee. And also we're expecting every club to nominate a trainer and send their names to us so that we can commence our training in the new year. So thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you on March 4th. DGE Sonia, would you like to say a few words in closing?
Thank you, Luana. Just want to say what an excellent evening. It's lived up to everything that I thought and more. The extra pep talk at the end was outstanding. I think that we have definitely hit on something good with this topic, and I look forward to where the district will go in this direction. Director Valerie, thank you for sparing your evening with us. I know that it's a little chunk, but we wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. We wanted the best person to speak on it, and we thank you for sharing this opportunity. Thank you, fellow Rotarians. Enjoy the rest of your evening and see you on March 4th. stay safe. Bye-bye. Thank you.